Druids. What exactly are they? Well, they were highly respected figures in ancient Celtic societies, we know that, serving as religious leaders, legal experts, keepers of knowledge. But this name, derived from the Celtic term for oak trees, highlights their deep connection to nature as well, and the spiritual significance of their oak groves. They were believed to perform religious ceremonies, including sacrifices, which were reported to have divinatory powers. While the rise of the Roman Empire largely diminished their influence in continental Europe, their practices, or at least what are imagined to be their practices, persisted longer in Ireland and Britain, until gradually fading with the spread of Christianity. Today, the image of the Druid has been revived in neo-pagan and New Age movements, often idealized and reconstructed based on what little historical evidence we have. Hello and welcome to the channel. If you are new, good to meet you. For those coming back, great to see you again. And I'll make you a deal. If you make me giggle with some interesting comment, your comment will be pinned for everyone to see. Just imagine the eternal glory of that. It's not a bad deal. Now, with all the introduction out of the way, we must remember that the topic of the Druids is pretty much seen through Roman eyes. Is it a historical record? Or is it propaganda to justify a conquest? We're not sure, but we're going to talk about as many angles as we can. And maybe by the end, we can make up our own minds about what exactly a Druid was. So let's get started. Nice and relaxed, as always. Both in Greco-Roman and vernacular Irish sources, there is a concurrence that the Druids held a significant role in the pagan Celtic culture. Julius Caesar described them as one of the two most significant social classes in the area, alongside the equites or aristocrats. They were responsible for managing religious rituals and sacrifices, predicting the future, and overseeing legal proceedings in Gallic, British, and Irish communities. Caesar had stated in his writings that they were immune to conscription and even taxation, and possessed the authority to ostracize individuals from religious celebrations, making them pariahs. Now, there was also Diodorus Siculus and Strabo who wrote about them, two additional prominent ancient authors, and they wrote very heavily on the significance of Druids in Gallic civilization. According to their accounts, the Druids commanded such reverence that the mere intervention between two armies had the power to halt a fight. Diodorus describes the Druids as philosophers and knowledgeable individuals in religious matters who were held in great respect. Strabo states that the scope of their expertise encompassed both natural philosophy, but also moral philosophy, while Ammianus Marcellinus categorizes them as scholars who delved into obscure and profound subjects. Pomponius Mela was the inaugural source to assert that the education of the Druids was clandestine and occurred within the dark corners of caves and the hidden places deep within the forests. It certainly builds up an aesthetic, doesn't it? Well, Cicero reported seeing a Gaulish Druid who professed to possess a knowledge of nature referred to as physiologia by the Greeks. This Druid would make predictions, employing methods such as augury and speculation. Druidic knowledge encompasses a vast collection of memorized passages, and Caesar observed that it could require as long as 2 decades to fully complete the curriculum. The content of the teachings given to beginner Druids, this kind of course structure, if we could call it that, is unfortunately uncertain. There is no verifiably ancient verse from the Druids' oral literature that has been preserved, even in translated form. According to Caesar, the Gauls mostly relied on oral communication for instructions, but they also possessed a written language for everyday needs, which, by the way, utilized Greek letters. Pretty common for languages without written forms at that time to co-opt the Greek alphabet. It's just an easy way of doing things. Well, later on, during the reign of Caesar and his interactions with them, the inscriptions of Gaul had been transitioned from using Greek alphabet to using the Latin script. Caesar suggested that the Druids' preference for oral transmissions of knowledge and aversion to documenting their thoughts stemmed from 2 main reasons. The first was a desire to safeguard the knowledge of the Druids from widespread dissemination, and the aim to enhance the Druids' memory capabilities. Caesar states that a significant number of young men gathered among the Druids to get training, and that the Druids had certain privileges that the general public would simply dream of having. It's stated as well that in Caesar's writings, I quote, "A significant number willingly chose to pursue this occupation, while others are compelled by their families for practical reasons to become Druids." The Druids were often mentioned by Greek and Roman literature as those who engaged in the act of human sacrifice. According to Caesar, individuals who had been convicted of theft or other criminal acts were regarded as more suitable for sacrificial purposes. However, in cases when there was a shortage of criminals, innocent individuals would be deemed acceptable. Caesar documented a type of sacrifice involving the immolation of victims inside a huge wooden fire, sometimes referred to as a wicker man. An alternative version was provided by the Commenta Bernensia from the 10th century, which reported that offerings to the gods Teotates, Eosus, and Tyrannos were made through drowning, hanging, and burning respectively. Diodorus Siculus claims that in order for a sacrifice to be deemed suitable by Celtic deities, it was necessary for a Druid to be present while the sacrifice occurred, as they served as kind of like middlemen between the people and the gods, a communicator. He emphasized the significance of the prophets in Druidic ceremonies in this way. I quote, "These men predict the future by observing the flight and calls of birds by the sacrifice of the holy animals. All orders of society are within their power, and in very important matters they prepare a human victim, plunging a dagger into his chest. By observing the way his limbs convulse as he falls and the gushing of his blood, they are able to tell the future." Well, archaeological evidence from Western Europe has extensively been employed to substantiate this hypothesis that Iron Age Celts engaged in ritualistic acts of human sacrifice. And in fact, they have discovered mass graves in Gaul that do date back to this time period. These tombs were found in a ritual setting and are located in the region of the Belgae chiefdom. The excavator of these sites, Jean-Louis Brunel, interpreted them as areas of human sacrifices dedicated to a war deity. However, not everybody is in agreement. It's challenged by another archaeologist, namely Martin Brown, who proposed that the bodies might belong to esteemed warriors buried in the sanctuary rather than actually being sacrificial offerings. And of course there's skepticism among historians over the accuracy of the statements made by the Greco-Roman writers. It's observed that there was uncertainty regarding whether Druids actually carried out such things. This uncertainty arose because the Romans and Greeks had a tendency to attribute what they perceived as barbaric characteristics to foreign groups, and that includes the Druids, and even the Christians. Well, at least before the days of Constantine, seeing that image of the cross over the bridge. Well, the Pythagorean doctrine prevails among the Gauls, teaching that the souls of men are immortal, and that after a fixed number of years, they will enter into another body. Julius Caesar noted in his commentaries on the Gallic War, Book 6, and I'll read from that now. With regard to their actual course of studies, the main object of all education is, in their opinion, to imbue the scholars with a firm belief in the indestructibility of the human soul, which, according to their belief, merely passes at death from one tenement to another. For by such doctrine alone, they say, which robs death of all of its terrors, can the highest form of human courage be developed. Subsidiary to the teachings of this main principle, they hold various lectures and discussions on the stars and their movements, on the extent and geographical distribution of the earth, and the different branches of natural philosophy, and on many problems connected with their religion. End of the account from the Gallic War. Well, in 36 BCE, Diodorus Siculus documented that the Druids adhered to the Pythagorean doctrine, which suggests, of course, as we've said, that human souls are eternal, and after a specific period of time begin a fresh existence in a different physical form, a different vehicle, if we're going to use terminology like from Hinduism and Buddhism. And in the 3rd century AD, Diogenes Laertius stated that Druids communicate their teachings using enigmatic riddles and obscure expressions. These teachings emphasize the necessity of worshipping the gods, refraining from harmful actions, and upholding virtuous conduct. Now, onto a little bit of folklore, because we kind of tread the line a little bit with videos like these, which is okay. It's not a problem. This isn't an academic journal, after all. But folklore is folklore, and history is history, so the line is drawn. Well, if we're looking at the folklore around Druids, we find ourselves well and truly within the realm of Ireland, and at the time within this confines of Irish folklore, the Druids typically serve as an esteemed, kind of like priest counselors to lords and kings, a wise man sort of archetype. They possess the ability to prophecy and possess other mystical powers. One notable example of a druid from folklore is Cathbad, Cathbad, the principal Druid of King Concobar mac Nessa's court in Ulster, is prominently featured in numerous stories, primarily focusing on his exceptional skill in predicting the future. A handy guy to have around, that's for sure. Now, in the story of Deirdre of the Sorrows, which is considered the most tragic tale in the Ulster cycle, a Druid made a prophecy in front of Concobar's court. The prophecy stated that Deirdre would become exceptionally beautiful, and that her beauty would lead to conflicts among kings and lords, resulting in a great deal of fighting and bloodshed. Furthermore, it was foreseen that Ulster's 3 most formidable warriors would be compelled to leave their homeland because of her. Well, the king disregarded the unfavorable prophecy, but ultimately it proved to be accurate. Sucks to be him, I guess. Well, Amergin Glungel, if I'm pronouncing the name properly, a renowned bard and judge, was considered the most prominent of the Druids within the mythological confine. He played a significant role in the mythological cycle as a representative of the Milesians. The Milesians were attempting to conquer the Tuatha de Danann and claim the country of Ireland for themselves. However, as they neared their destination, the Druids of the Tuatha de Danann conjured a powerful storm to prevent their ships from reaching the shore. Amergin invoked the essence of Ireland by reciting a potent spell, now referred to as the Song of Amergin. This incantation played a role in his successful arrival on the Irish shores, and subsequently in assisting his royal siblings to conquer and partition the land. As a result, Amergin was bestowed with the prestigious title of Chief Olam of Ireland. Additional fabled Druids were Taugt Macht Nuach from the Fenian cycle and Mag Graith from a formidable tale of a blind Druid from Munster. In Irish mythology there are several female Druids too, because we can't leave the girls out, who frequently have comparably significant cultural and religious positions, just like their male counterparts. In Irish folklore, there are multiple terms for female Druids. One such term is Bandre, which means woman Druid, and can be found in stories like Tain Bo Cowling. Another notable female Druid is Bodmal, who was mentioned in the Fenian cycle, and was one of Fionn mac Comail's caretakers during his childhood. Additionally, there is Tlagda, a daughter of the Druid Moog Graith. According to Irish tradition, Tlagda is associated with the Hill of Ward, a significant location where festivals in her honor were held during the Middle Ages. Birog, a Bandre woman Druid from the Tuatha de Danann, plays a significant role in Irish folklore. In this tale, the Fomorian warrior Balor tries to prevent a prophecy that predicts his own grandson will kill him. To do this, he imprisons his daughter Aithne in the tower of Tory Island, isolating her from any interaction with men. Becuil, the offspring of the wood's deity Fildias, is occasionally depicted as a sorceress rather than a bandre. In one narrative, she collaborates with 3 other members of the Tuatha Dé to vanquish the malevolent Greek enchantress Carman. And she's not the only bandre, of course. There's another Relbio, a Nemedian Druid mentioned in the Book of Invasions, and she is shown as the offspring of the king of Greece and the parent of Fergus Lethderg and Alma One-Tooth. Dornall, a bandre in Scotland, specializes in training heroes in fightings, specifically Laeger and Conall. She is the daughter of Domnall Mildemail. So as we can see, in terms of this mythology and folklore, it's a very broad brush. Now, if we are sticking with this term bandre, we can usually find that within these folklore contexts and within those sources that they come from, that it is specifically mentioned that this is a bandre, the bandre so-and-so. But it's not as though the attributes are so strictly defined. There's a bit of movement between these folklore contexts. Well, moving on. The Galizene, as described by classical authors, were celibate priestesses who resided on the Ile de Seine, located off Pont du Raz in Finisterre, Western Brittany. And they're a little bit different to the bandre, a different categorization. The Greek geographer Artemidorus Ephesius was first to acknowledge their existence, followed by the Greek historian Strabo, who stated that their island was off limits to men, but the women would travel to the mainland to reunite with their spouses. The deities they revered, however, well, that remains a little bit of a mystery. We don't quite know. Now, Pomponius Mela states that the Galizene fulfilled the dual roles of advisors and also medical professionals, possessing knowledge that was tightly kept secrets within their islands. Once again, we see this prevalence of oral histories that always comes about with these sorts of societies. Sena, in the Britannic Sea, opposite the coast of Ossisme, is famous for its oracle of Gaulish god, whose priestesses, living in the holiness of perpetual virginity, are said to be 9 in number. They call them Galizene, and they believe them to be endowed with extraordinary gifts to rouse the sea and the wind by their incantations. They turn themselves into whatsoever animal form they may choose, to cure diseases, which among others are incurable, to know what is to come and to foretell it. They are, however, devoted to the service of voyagers, only who have set out on no other errand than to consult them. Now, that's the end of the account from the classical authorship. Well, on to another classical source, the Historia Augusta. And as per this, Alexander Severus was informed of his impending death by a Gallic druidess. In his book, Aurelian also interrogates a druidess over the destiny of his children, to which they affirmatively respond in support of Claudius II. Flavius Vobiscus also mentions a prophecy that Diocletian had heard from a druidess of the Tungri tribe. But the earliest extant textual evidence of the Druids, which is outside of a folklore context, originates from the classical civilizations of Greece and Rome. You've probably noticed the prevailing trend that we always have to go back to things like Julius Caesar and Diodorus Siculus, these sorts of sources. Now, there was an archaeologist, Stuart Piggott, who drew a parallel between the way classical authors viewed the Druids and the way that Europeans in the 15th and 18th centuries perceived the societies they were encountering in other regions, like, for example, the Americas and the South Sea Islands. He emphasizes this concept of primitivism in both early modern European and classical authors, as they believed that nations they saw were less technologically advanced and socially and politically underdeveloped. In fact, if you were to ask a Greek or a Roman what a barbarian was, in most times they would simply tell you that it's anybody who's not Greek. Or the Romans say, well, it's anybody who's not Roman. Now, historian Nora Chadwick, in a classification later accepted by Pickett, split the classical descriptions of Druids into two categories based on their method of studying the subject and the time periods in which they were written. It refers to the first group as Posidonian, named after one of its main proponents, Posidonius. It's highlighted that this tradition adopts a predominantly negative stance towards the Iron Age communities in Western Europe, emphasizing their, quote, barbaric characteristics. We're talking about the human sacrifice and all these sort of things, the strange ways in which they would tell the future by watching the entrails dance about on the end of a knife. Sounds barbaric. It's meant to. Of course, they may have done all of that. They may not have. Let's find out. Well, the second group, not the Posidonian, the second, is known as the Alexandrian group, and that is focused more on the scholastic traditions of Alexandria, Egypt. It is characterized by a more compassionate and idealistic perspective towards other peoples. Pickett made connections between this classification and the concepts of hard primitivism and soft primitivism, as described by historians of ideas A. O. Lovejoy and Franz Boas. Now, one perspective suggests that all of these narratives are intrinsically untrustworthy, and maybe they are simply all made up, fabricated works of fiction. It's been proposed that the concept of the Druid in general may have been a complete fabrication by classical authors simply to strengthen the notion of the uncivilized barbarian who resided beyond the refined Greco-Roman society. This would have served, of course, to justify the empire's conquest of these regions. Perhaps so. It's something to think about. But what about the earliest documentation? Because it does go back further than you might think. In fact, we can find it around 300 BC. It goes back to two Greek works around this time, a philosophical history, authored by Sotion of Alexandria, and a magical treatise, which is sometimes credited to Aristotle, but we're not quite confirmed on that, at least not yet. Well, both of these manuscripts have unfortunately been misplaced. We don't have the originals, which is terrible, I know, but they are cited in the 2nd century AD publication Vitae by Diogenes Laertius. And this is a quote from the introduction of his work, Vitae. Some say that the study of philosophy originated with the barbarians, in that among the Persians that existed, the Magi, and among the Babylonians or Assyrians, the Chaldei, among the Indians too, and among the Celts and Gauls, men who were called Druids, as Aristotle relates in his book on magic, and Sotion in the 23rd book of his succession of philosophers. You see right there, he's mentioned that book on magic of Aristotle. And this is where we get this idea that is, one, accredited to Aristotle, and two, that we have a source from that time. Now, later Greek and Roman sources, dating back to the 3rd century BC, mention, and I quote, barbarian philosophers, which is a potential allusion to this concept of the Gaulish Druid. Of course, Julius Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic War, published in the 50s or 40s BC, that is our oldest surviving source that provides a more comprehensive description of Druids. Caesar, who had ambitions to conquer Gaul and Britain, characterized the Druids as those who were primarily focused on matters related to religious devotion, the proper execution of ceremonial offerings, whether in private or public settings, and the clarification of ritualistic inquiries. According to him, the Druids held a significant role in Gaulish culture, being one of the two esteemed classes with the equites, known in Rome, by the way, as the privileged class above the common people. In fact, they were commonly referred to simply as horsemen. You know, the word equine being related to horse. Now, he also mentions in his works that one of the main responsibilities of the Druids was to effectively serve as judges. Caesar recorded that the Druids recognized a single leader who would rule until his death, when a successor would be chosen by ballot, or sometimes conflict. He claimed that they met annually at a holy site in Gaul's Carnute tribe. Considering Britain the center of the Druidic education, and that they were absent from German tribes east of the Rhine. Caesar wrote that many young men were trained to become Druids and had to memorize all the relevant knowledge and teachings, adding that their main belief was that souls were immortal and transitioned from one body to another after death, and that they were fascinated by the stars, celestial bodies and their motions, the universe and the earth's vastness, nature, and the eternal power of their deities. This suggests religious involvement included astronomy, as well as theology and cosmology, all together. Caesar thought that those who oversaw human sacrifice ceremonies, usually involving prisoners, as we've mentioned, were kind of like administrators. Now, many modern scholars take a look at the writings of Caesar and kind of tar it with a brush of historical inaccuracy, despite his reported personal encounters with the Gauls and the Druids. Now, some historians note that Caesar acknowledged the Druids as a major force in Gaulish society, but did not mention them in his accounts of his victories. After Caesar's death, Aulus Hirtius didn't finish his Gallic Wars chronicle. It's believed that Caesar had portrayed the Druids as cultured, knowledged, and religiously devoted, but also savage in terms of the human sacrifice. This portrayal portrayed the Druids as a society worthy of assimilation into the Roman Empire, while imposing Roman governance and principles on their civilization. Basically, just barbaric enough that they need to be conquered, but just human enough to be left alive to add to the tax base. That's pretty much what it comes down to. And it's maybe a simplified view of it, but that certainly seems what he was getting at. Of course, Caesar's military campaigns were justified by this rationale. Caesar's accounts may be more accurate, say some historians, who says that the depiction of the Druids' role in Gaulish society may have been idealized from the 2nd century BC onwards. You see, the society before the Arverni-led Pan-Gallic Confederation was defeated in 121 BC inspired this tradition. Teutones and Cimbri invaded Gaul, and the demoralized and divided Gaul of Caesar's time is simply not accurately described. By the mid-1st century BC, the Druids' social influence in Britain was declining as paramount chieftains established new power structures. Some researchers believe that Roman conquest caused the Druid order's decline. Caesar provides the most accurate and abundant information about the Druids according to archaeologists Miranda Aldhouse Green. She argues that his records were accurate because he may have exaggerated a few details to justify Roman conflict, but he did not create a Gaul and Britain social hierarchy. This is especially true because he was accompanied by several Roman senators, who would have also sent conquest reports to Rome and questioned his inclusion of significant falsehoods. Well, additionally, other renowned authors provided observations regarding the Druids. Cicero, who lived around the same time as Caesar, mentioned that he had met in person a Druid named Divitiacus from the Aedui tribe of Gaul. Now, he was reputedly knowledgeable about the natural world and practiced divination using augury. However, there is a debate about whether he was truly a Druid. Now, Caesar, who was familiar with Diviaticus, referred to him as Diviciacus, which sounded more Gaulish and therefore more genuine. However, Caesar never described him as a Druid, but rather portrayed him as a political and military leader. Now, of course, Diodorus Siculus had his say too. He provided a description of the Druids in his work Bibliotheca Historicae in 36 BC, shortly after other writers had also discussed the topic. In addition to the Druids, whom he referred to as Droidas, whom he perceived as philosophers and theologians, he observed the presence of poets and singers in Celtic civilization, whom he referred to as bards. Strabo, writing in the 20s CE, elaborated on this concept, stating that Gauls recognized 3 distinct categories of esteemed individuals. The individuals referred to as bardoi were poets and singers. The ovates were diviners and experts of the natural world, and the Druids were scholars who focused on the study of moral philosophy. And then there's Tacitus, a Roman writer who was also a senator and historian, who recounted the events when the Roman army, under the command of Suetonius Paulinus, launched an attack on the island of Mona, which is, by the way, in Welsh known as Anglesey. Upon landing, the legionnaires were reportedly struck with awe as they witnessed a group of Druids with their hands raised to the sky, uttering fearsome curses upon the invading forces. According to him, these objects caused great fear among the soldiers, who had never seen anything like it before. And of course, there's only one reasonable course of action. Just start swinging the swords around. According to the Roman historians, the Romans quickly overcame their concerns and vanquished the Britons, causing them to flee. Additionally, the Romans destroyed the sacred groves of the Druids on Mona. Well, Tacitus is the sole primary source that provides descriptions of Druids in Britain, although in a negative light, depicting them as uncivilized and lacking knowledge. Of course, during the Middle Ages, following the Christianization of Ireland and Wales, Druids are mentioned in several recorded sources, primarily in tales and stories like Tain Bo Culling, as well as in the biographies of several saints. All of these, by the way, were authored by Christian monks. Now, in Irish literature, Druids, which is Druid, plural of Drawe, are sorcerers possessing extraordinary abilities, who are held in high regard throughout society, particularly for their aptitude in divination, this fortune-telling. Now, the Dictionary of the Irish Language provides a definition of a Druid as a practitioner of magic, wizardry, and divination. Within the realm of literature, the Druids possess the ability to perform incantations that result in the transformation of individuals into animals, or even turning them into stone. Additionally, they have the power to inflict curses upon crops, causing them to wither away and become blighted. During the early Irish sagas and pre-Christian Irish saints' lives are typically depicted as having elevated social standing. The law texts, documented in the 6 and 700s AD, provide evidence indicating that the advent of Christianity led to a significant decline in the social status of Druids in Irish society. They were increasingly perceived as sorcerers who could be sought out for spell casting or healing magic, resulting in a corresponding decrease in their prestige. According to the ancient legal document Breitha Clorlig, the amount of support that should be provided to a druid, satirist, or brigand while they are unwell is no greater than what should be provided to an ordinary freeman. Orakect Brek, a legal text, includes the druid as of the Dor Nemed or professional classes, who rely on patron for their social standing. This places them in the same category as a lot of other trades like blacksmiths, wrights, or entertainers. But in contrast, the Fili, who were the only ones to have independent Nemed status, had a significantly higher level of freedom. Now, although Druids were frequently depicted in numerous medieval Irish sources, they were far less common in their Welsh counterparts. In contrast to the Irish writings, the Welsh term dreo was widely employed to specifically denote prophets rather than sorcerers or pagan priests. According to one historian, Ronald Hutton, there are two explanations for the use of the term in Wales. Now, the first explanation suggests that it originated from the pre-Christian era when dreo were referred to as ancient priests. The second explanation proposes that the Welsh borrowed the term from the Irish, just like the English did. The English used the terms dry and drycraft to refer to magicians and magic, likely influenced by the Irish terms. So, what exactly are we left with? Well, the idea of the Druid that exists in people's subconscious, especially the Welsh, the Irish, the English, has been preserved. We have modern communities who are keeping the tradition alive, what they know of the tradition. But like a lot of things, it's been subject to this great amount of romanticism. And, well, a lot of these modern sort of perceptions of what it is seem to be equal to cosplay meetups. This is not to disparage anyone. It just seems to be the reality. Well, perhaps there's always time to develop new traditions. And perhaps in 1,000 years, the modern conception of the Druid that we have now, or perhaps that will be looked back upon and we'll be having the same kinds of conversations. Perhaps in 1,000 years, somebody will be making a video about Druids in the 2020s. Who knows? It certainly won't be me. I'm going to be around for a while, but certainly not that long. Well, with that, we get to the end of the video for the Druids. I'd like to thank the patrons and supporters who keep the channel going. Dark, Kerry, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Erin, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, and Jessica. Thank you all very much. Know that very appreciative of your contributions. And that's it from me for today. I will see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. Lots of love to you all. Goodbye for now.